by a panel of experts here just to talk about these numbers. Just a bit of reaction. I've got Paul Bekovitz. He's a local government expert, and I've got the director, of the Third Republic. And then I've got Kevin Allen, he's a managing director at Municipal IQ. And in studio with me, I've asked Kathy Mtila to continue being here with me as we try and unpack some of these. Can I start with you, Kevin, from Municipal IQ? What went through your mind when you were listening to the Auditor General, or as you were reading what has come out of this latest report about the financial ill health of our municipalities?
It's another shocker. I mean, it seems to be the same every year. You have municipalities, they work on the audit process all year, they submit, or as you were saying earlier, they don't submit at all, which is just absolutely astounding, or they get disclaimers. Now, if you get a disclaimer, really, there's either corruption or there's complete incompetence there. And as you and your colleague was saying in studio, it's just another terrible result. What the Auditor General commented on as well, which was very compelling for me, is that she said in the last political term, when the last set of politicians left, they left local government in a worse state than when they arrived. Now that's a really important statement for me, because it means there's actual evidence that local government over the course of the last term, the last 5 years of the administration, has actually got worse. And the Auditor General, in her excellent report, is again showing us how poorly municipalities are performing this essential function.
Yeah, and when you perform such an essential function so badly, no wonder, Paul, on the local level, it's like there's no compliance with something that needs to be basic, and the few where there's compliance, as the Auditor General said, does not necessarily translate into service delivery.
That's right, Dan. I think if you look at the big picture, getting the audit right is just the start of service delivery of any pro-poor policies. It's a necessary condition to do the hard work of service delivery, or just the routine work, but service delivery at community development work. So that's how bad things are. That's not even being done in the majority of municipalities. So we cannot even talk about the next stage in most of the time, because submitting financial statements that are honest, that are accurate, that are on time is beyond so many municipalities.
Yeah, Aviwe, you were there, and she made this point. I saw bits and pieces of her announcement. She talked about the whole. She said all role players in the local government accountability ecosystem have to play their part. That means right from that department, that unit in the municipality that's got a CFO, the head of finance, all the way up to the councillors, the MM in the council, all the way to the mayor, all the way to the copter. People must play their role. It seems like there's an issue with accountability.
Or the lack of accountability, because we're seeing no accountability at all, Brad, and as you mentioned, from all these district municipalities where the CFO or the municipal managers are supposed to be held account, especially from the COCTA, cooperative government itself, that's supposed to be holding all the municipalities account. It's quite glaring that of the 257 municipalities, it's the district municipalities in majority that have had clean audits. Where the big money goes into the metros, only one has had a clean audit, or the bigger municipalities that get the bigger bulk of the money, a lot of them in financial shambles.
Yeah, financial shambles. Actually, in fact, Paul and Kevin, I saw a line in the media release where she said, and I just want a comment from you. I mean, there's a number of things that have come out of this, but where she talks about the dire state of affairs, she says the financial position of 28% of South Africa's municipalities is so dire that there is significant doubt about whether they'll be able to continue operating in the near future. I mean, that's nearly a third of South African municipalities may be goners in the near future, unless something dramatic happens. Paul, what do you think?
That was very scary. And I would like to also, Dan, commend the Auditor General and her team, because the latest release is very user-friendly with very beautiful, easy to understand graphics and visualizations. And I think there's a lot of nuance that's easy for most readers to grasp, that it goes beyond whether the audit is clean or dirty, but it goes to whether, as you say, the municipality is actually a going concern in financial terms, in basic accounting. Does it have money to pay? And there's some scary numbers in there, Dan, that some municipalities are taking almost 2 years on average in their debt cycle to get money, and maybe a year and a half to pay their creditors. It is ridiculous. I want to quickly say that there's an elephant in the room, and it is corruption. And it is overwhelmingly taking place in ANC-controlled municipalities. So a bit tongue-in-cheek, the biggest thing we can do to improve the audits and a culture of accountability is to get opposition parties in. Coalitions, there's a ray of sunshine, they seem to be holding in the Gauteng metros. So almost every municipality that was DA run has received a clean audit. There are exceptions.
Yeah,
and there are, of course, almost 20 municipalities that the ANC controlled over the last 5 years with their clean audits as well. And there are lessons to be learned from that. But Kevin earlier said it could be corruption or it could be incompetence. And maybe the incompetence is by design and not by error. In fact, it looks overwhelmingly likely that the cause and effect is to have chaos in a municipal financial office because it is easier to steal.
Yeah, the AG was a little bit more circumspect. She didn't go to incompetence, but it's linked. She spoke about the lack of discipline. I mean, you've got financial units where you've got qualified people in financial management, as in accountants, and you have a CFO, but some of them don't do their work at all. She said that speaks to a lack of discipline, yet the payroll is over 11 billion rand. It's about 11 billion rand, the payroll. People are getting paid for what, Kevin?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, and I agree with your other guests as well. An interesting factor, the National Treasury's Director General, when he was leaving a couple of weeks ago, he said the National Treasury can no longer cope with the financial problems that are presented to it by municipalities. That is a shocking thing for a DG walking out the door to say. And what also correlates clearly with this AG's report is that the National Treasury has also said that 2/3 of municipalities are in financial distress. Now, that's another indicator of what the AG is saying, that links very strongly with what she's saying about the financial dire straits that municipalities are in. And at Municipal IQ, I must say, Dan, we are getting really worried about municipalities. We are starting to wonder if municipalities are reaching a point of no return. And ultimately, just in terms of leadership as well, it must be said, the thing that the Auditor General has emphasized a lot over her last few reports, and she emphasizes again in this report, is an accountability ecosystem and the importance of leadership at all levels. And she points to something that we also find very important, and that is the role of provincial and national leadership. And ultimately, it's about holding people accountable. As you say, and this speaks to the point you were making, who is accountable? I mean, people are being paid. You have a CFO who is ultimately responsible for the audit process. He or she is the person at whom the buck stops. Now, what are they doing? I mean, how can you have a CFO who remains unchallenged when that CFO cannot deliver an audit? It's not that the audit is problematic. They cannot deliver the report itself. How come that CFO is not challenged on that? How come that CFO is still in position? And ultimately, I think what the AG is getting round to, and certainly it's what we emphasize as well, is that we need our leadership in charge of the country, and essentially this is the ANC leadership, to take some responsibility at a provincial and a national level here and say, okay, enough is enough. You know, you've got these people that are being paid millions. They are either incompetent or corrupt, and I use those terms again, and we must confront them. You know, the mayor doesn't want to confront them. The Public Accounts Committee in the council doesn't want to confront them. We as the public, residents in this municipality, and many of these municipalities, as you were saying earlier, a very good example is the Free State. There are other examples. The Eastern Cape is rife with municipalities that have either failed or are on the point of failure. Limpopo, Northwest, there are very many. And who is ultimately holding someone accountable here? I mean, there are many steps in the ladder of accountability. The top one, and the AG emphasizes this herself, is Parliament. Parliament must hold national government to account. Parliament has been talking about auditing over the last 2 odd years, but what is Parliament doing? Parliament should also be saying to national government, listen, guys, you've got to step in. National governments should say to provincial government, every MEC of all 9 provinces, every MEC of cooperative governance or local government is ultimately responsible for what happens in the municipalities in his or her province. So if no one in a particular province is getting any kind of reasonable audit, well, the MEC should be held accountable by higher leadership.
Yeah, the AG, Paul did make the point, and she starts a statement with the issue of the local government accountability ecosystem has to be diligently, people must play their roles diligently. Very, very, very important that. If you're just joining us now, there's a box on the right of your screen. I understand Dr. Mpho Phalatse, the mayor of Johannesburg, is visiting Soweto, Dlamini, where a 6-year-old boy has been missing since Sunday, apparently dropped into a water manhole there. The search has been continuing, and the Madlanga family is hoping for some closure. We are showing our viewers that little box there in case you're wondering what that it's about, because there's no sound from it. We're still busy with this discussion around the AG's report today. Now, on the issue of accountability, I think the point was well made there, Paul. But citizens have to play a role. I spoke to Dr. Klute from the University of Free State after 2 o'clock. He said until and unless citizens can hold their municipal councillors to account, very little might change, because the governing party does not seem to be getting it right. Kevin, what are your thoughts about citizens, residents' involvement in ensuring that there's an improvement in the health of the financial health of the municipalities?
Yeah, it's very important. It's a very important element of local government. There are processes in place which are enshrined in our legislation and regulations, which should be ensuring that municipalities and municipal councils are including people, allowing them to participate in governance processes. But ultimately, you know, Dan, it must be said, and I speak frankly here, that for the most part, those forums are not taken seriously. And, you know, the citizens, residents of municipalities are at the bottom of the ecosystem here. They are on the ground level.
We've seen when they raise their voices, they protest. We've seen that there is action. In fact, Paul, let me bring you in here. When I spoke to Dr. Klute earlier, he was saying in their research in local municipalities, they are told by residents that the government only comes to us when there is smoke in the streets.
Yes, and that's, again, a very sad indication of where things have got to, that there must be violence and spectacle to attract the attention of the politicians who are responsible. I agree with Kevin, Dan. There are forums, there's legislation. The whole Chapter 4 of the Municipal Systems Act talks about community participation. It talks about what the municipality must do in terms of providing information and access to decision-making, particularly around the budget. But as Kevin says, a lot of that is window dressing and rubber stamping. And again, we must talk about the elephant in the room. Nelson Mandela Bay government has collapsed because not just because it was a razor-thin coalition with a lot of different parties, but because, again, the ANC is trying to ram through compromised candidates for municipal manager. And that coalition has collapsed. The adjustment budget was not passed in February. Who knows if the budget will be passed in the next 2 weeks by the deadline. It certainly will not have had the proper public participation and input and oversight because there's barely a government there to begin with.
Yeah,
in fact,
it seems like sorry, Paul. It seems like politics comes in the way of delivery. From what you've just said, they're using the example of what's happening in the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, Paul. Aviwe, let me bring you in again here. I heard the Auditor General also talking about the role of citizens when she was talking this morning, and to say that in this ecosystem also the residents of these municipalities have a role to play because the services are meant for them. This is public money.
And what we see is the residents often then take to the streets because of what we're seeing, the deterioration of these municipalities is the outcome. We see time and again, for example, in the Free State that's been mentioned, Maluti Phofung municipality, which has barely no water, but time and again we see those protests. And there's an interesting point that the AG raised today, saying that years and years of ignoring these audits has weakened these institutions. So it begs the questions really, Bradan, what happens after the AG report has been released? Do we see any fact-finding mission to go to these municipalities to try and strengthen the institutions, or do we just move on as government? What does the president say, for example, when he hears that this current administration over the last 5 years hasn't been performing? There's been lack of accountability. What really happens after the report has been released? Do we just continue as if there's another day, or are real tangible actions taken to ensure that the corruption and the rot that's really happening in these institutions doesn't carry on and happen?
Is there a case, I'm going to ask you, Paul, and Kevin, as well as experts, I'm going to ask my colleague Aviwe here, although I know he'll have a view. Is there a case now, has the time come in democratic South Africa to review the local government model? I'm not talking about Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma's recent district development model where they are doing all those things. I mean, just looking at it, where local councillors who are either incompetent or lack the discipline, they may have the skill or they don't have the skill, but politics comes in the way, that affects service delivery. Because that's what local government is about. Local government is not about nothing else except to make sure the roads are fine, there's lights, there's no potholes, people feel safe, there's beautiful parks for the kids to play, there's recreational facilities. Have we come to a point in South Africa where, Kevin, let me start with you, we should really be relooking at this model and making and restructuring it completely?
Yeah, that's a very good question, I must say, and I think it's becoming more pertinent. You know, it's enshrined in our constitution is that local government is one of three spheres, equal spheres of government in South Africa. You have national, provincial, and local government. They're not tiers, they're equal spheres. And this may surprise some people, but South Africa is one of the most decentralized regional and local government systems in the world. That means that our local governments have an enormous amount of power. They have power to raise funds, they have power to take decisions, and they don't have to consult or they don't have to report directly on those decisions. So decisions around budgets and finances and that sort of thing. And increasingly, I think people are asking, has this model worked? I think it's a complex question. I think if local government continues to deteriorate, and I think, as I said before, we are getting to a point of no return in local government. We are on the verge of a significant number of municipalities collapsing. I think a number have already collapsed. They don't function as municipalities anymore, although councillors and officials still get paid. They do nothing. But really, ultimately, if this continues, we are going to have a conversation as citizens and as government and reassess this constitutional issue of whether local government should, in fact, be an equal sphere of government. Because local government, I think ultimately, since democracy, we could really start asking the question of whether local government has actually failed. generally speaking, whether our story of local government in South Africa is a success or whether it's failed. We're getting to the point where we're going to have to recognize that local government is indeed failing and will fail in the next few years completely. And then, we are going to be left with a situation where we really are going to have to rethink whether local government should be such a decentralized and powerful sphere, equal sphere of government.
Yeah, Kevin, your thoughts? I mean, Paul, your thoughts?
Dan, firstly, I agree with everything Kevin has said. We've had 21 years of local government. We've had a new system since the year 2000. And it's a very personal story because I've been, for probably at least 14 of those last 21 years, analyzing local government. And the idea of a decentralized bottom-up government, a government of the people with community participation, is something that's incredibly important. And part of that vision was also to reverse and surpass the effects of apartheid by unpicking spatial planning and unequal development. So now we have wall-to-wall administration where Sandton can support Alex and Joburg can support Soweto, and we grow together. Local government has failed, but that's, I think, is a failure of government in general from national downwards. The resources were in place, literal assets and transfer of skills and support from National Treasury. We are in many municipalities on the brink of collapse. We are choosing to focus as the Third Republic on our 8 metros, because that's about half of the country and 2/3 of the economy. And we believe that the metros are going to be the make or break story of South Africa, not just whether there will be service delivery and there will be development, but whether coalition governments in South Africa, and that's what our system is designed towards and work and moving more towards, if coalition governments can work and work for everyone. And we are mildly optimistic given the first 6 months. Let's not varnish it. There are at least 3 of the 8 metros already in a huge mess. eThekwini, Nelson Mandela Bay, Mangaung, probably at least 2 of those 3 are going to be placed under administration in the next few weeks. But we are seeing that opposition parties and coalition are providing the checks and balances. There does need to be more power for communities. Ward councillors need to have more power and authority, and there are things we can do, and there are changes we can make, and there are gaps that we can fill, and we need to fill over these next 5 years of municipal government if we are going to save local government and South Africa as a whole.
You know, as you're talking, gentlemen, I'm thinking if local government was working well and the Auditor General's report was different, you won't be feeling it. If local government is working, you shouldn't be aware that there's local government. Things should be happening, you know, the roads should be clean and rubbish being picked up everywhere regularly. And you said some municipalities in the Free State have no water. There should be water each time you open the tap, you know, and stuff like that. We just had local government elections in November now. As Paul says, 6 months later, we are hoping that those that work in the coalition metros, it will carry on and do so. And the leadership issue does come up in the Auditor General's report.
It does, certainly does. And going back to that point again of how these institutions have been deliberately weakened by not even adhering to the Auditor General report. What the Auditor General tried to do, given her powers that she's been given in the last 3 years, she tried to look at these ill-performing, I think there are about 22 of the disclaimer audit opinion municipalities. She took 10. And out of those 10, only 4 came forward with the financial statements. The other 6 didn't even care, Bradan. They didn't even bother coming out with those financial statements. But in the 4, there's an issue of about 1.7 billion rand that's unaccounted for in terms of what exactly has been done with the money. What she did try to do is go to the financial body saying that here are the red flags, please take a look at this. And of course, it's now up to the institutions if they have the teeth. And again, it goes back to COCTA, it goes back to really looking at this administration and whether it's willing, it really has the teeth to go and check what exactly is wrong with local government.
Gentlemen, I mean, I just want to ask you this question. We are heading towards the end of our conversation shortly. Paul and Kevin, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I mean, like everything else in South Africa nowadays, it seems like we have an emergency everywhere. You know, we had the floods, climate change impact in KwaZulu-Natal. We've all seen it, affected Eastern Cape as well and parts of Northwest. We have an unemployment crisis in this country. The numbers don't lie. Now we have a local government crisis. Is it time for, at the beginning, for example, for Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, as the Minister of Culture, at the national level, I mean, to hold a crisis summit of sorts with all the relevant stakeholders to say, how do we fix this? Because the way it's going now, it doesn't look fixable. Paul?
Dan, we've had in the last 3 or 4 years even more powers and legislation passed to make the Auditor General's job easier. We had amendments to the National Audit Act so that the Auditor General in her office could actually recommend individuals for prosecution. There's an article out today where the head of the National Prosecuting Authority, Ms. Shamila Bato, talks about the uphill struggle that her office is having trying to clean up municipalities in the Free State, that officials are burning or hiding documentation, that they're running out the clock, that colleagues and comrades are reluctant and reticent to report on each other and to run clean offices and administrations. And the rot spreads in many municipalities. Kevin mentioned there's the Free State, there's many years in the Northwest, where in some kind of sick joke, the only working form of intergovernmental relations is corruption that's happening between local and provincial level, and maybe national. I'm very cynical at this point. So I don't know if a crisis meeting will help. It can't hurt.
Thank you very much for your views there, Paul. Kevin, your parting thoughts?
Yeah, look, I think ultimately, I'm not sure about a national meeting or what effect a forum would have. We have many such things, and I've attended hundreds of them myself in my many years in local government. But ultimately, the solution for me is a single issue, and that is holding municipal officials and councillors accountable. Now, that has to come from other spheres of government because it has failed at a local level. Mayors do not hold the administration accountable, and so all the way down, people are not held accountable. That's why you have failure. That's why you have the collapse of service delivery. Now, until we increase our legislation, we're increasing it again, amendments to the Municipal Structures Act, to the Systems Act, to the Auditing Act, as Paul was saying, to give more teeth to those in charge to affect change. But ultimately, we already have lots of legislation which can be used. Municipal administrators, they all have key performance outcomes. They have performance reports, and they're being paid, a lot of them, many millions of rands. But they're not being held accountable in terms of their contracts. They're not being held accountable by anyone. And until other spheres of government step in, ultimately, and until they are prepared to lose some friends locally, local politicians, and the problem is, this is where provincial and national role players have their support base. So they do have conflicting loyalties here. Are they going to stand up for residents of municipalities, or are they going to keep having to nod to local leaders who provide the support to them in their roles at provincial and national level? And I think they need to make the courageous choice and choose residents over the local leaders who support them.
Thank you very much, Kevin Allen and Paul Bekovitz, and also my colleague here in studio, Aviu Mtila, senior reporter, was there when the Auditor General released this latest report on the dismal performance of municipalities, the ill health of our municipalities. A lot is going to need to be done to resolve this dire situation. Thank you very much, gentlemen.